Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, I didn't know anything about The Last Airbender. Then, everything changed when my best friend said, let's do a podcast. We could call it Avatar State Radio. 6,953 days had passed before I discovered Avatar. Not the Blue Cats, but a 19-year-old cartoon. Like Aang, I have a lot to learn, but I believe I'll love Avatar The Last Airbender. Welcome to this week's edition of Avatar State Radio. I am the last podbender, Kevin Gallagher, and I am the host of this show that has never seen anything beyond episode 10 of book 1, Avatar The Last Airbender.
And I'm the other guy. I've seen all the episodes. I'm seeing it a second time. I've seen all the other projects as well. I've read the comics. I'm super cool. I'm Mike D'Angelo.
And you can find us on Avatar State Radio. We do not have social media dedicated to this podcast because we can barely hang on as it is with what we're doing outside of this podcast. So just follow us and our plugs that are in the show notes and what we say at the end of the notes if you want to find us outside of avatarstateradio.com.
You know you did.
Woo, yeah. So this episode, another banger, Mike. Jet, it's called.
Yes, it is.
Loved it. What a way to open the episode, first of all. I'm jumping right into it. I know sometimes we don't
need no banter. We already bantered.
We don't need to banter. But Momo gets caught right away. And oh my God, what a way to jump my heart. What? And
what are you doing to my little guy?
Right. And it's ultimately nothing to worry about. We're good. There's a couple, I didn't get a great look. They look like standard forms of either monkey or ape or gorilla or something like that.
Baboons. I mean, so I would imagine that there's some kind of mix because typically in the Avatar universe, we see a lot of hybrids. So I would assume that there's some kind of thing going on, but who knows? Yeah, I mean, they are either too small to see because they're high up in the trees, or when they get cut down because Sokka is not a gentle soul and just chucks his boomerang knife thing to cut the cages down instead of letting Aang just rise up with his airbending and gently let them out. Right, there can't be a way that was a comfortable descent, right?
No, not at all. Even if they were falling and not having to deal with a cage, they not only landed on the ground, they landed on a cage. Sokka was kind of a dick right there.
Yeah, a little bit. I would assume that was done for animation purposes or something like that. Like, hey, the artists were saving money by doing it that way.
Right. But this episode, right from that point on, is like a lot of just fun banter at the top of the episode here. Sokka says that the Fire Nation has been tracking them so easily because of Appa, which I don't buy. I get where he's coming from. That is a logical thing to say, 100%. I don't think it's accurate. I think that's him just wanting to.
We've seen it happen in an episode, Kev.
We did see it in an episode, but I don't know. If they're over land, which I feel like that's, at least where they're starting, they don't have to worry about that. And if your plan is to walk, Sokka, well, you're going to be over land anyway. You're not going to be over the water. You don't have to worry about the Fire Nation sending, those flaming balls after you.
We saw it happen on land in an episode.
Did we? Oh,
yeah. When Katara was on, it was, what was he doing? It was when Uncle was kidnapped from the hot springs. Yeah. And remember, he was traveling after Uncle and saw Appa in the air and had to make that decision.
That's accurate. That's all right, Sokka. Maybe you're right. Maybe, and this is one of my favorite bits of this episode. Maybe your instincts are right, Sokka, but that doesn't deny that you are just full of pent-up Arrow jealousy.
Right, absolutely. He's just jealous because he doesn't have an arrow on his head like Aang and
That
Appa.
was such a funny comment because, like, you know, and it's not something. Maybe we talked about it like very briefly in the early episodes when I was just getting acquainted with the show, but like it's never like brought up that there's an arrow not only on Aang's head, but on Appa's body or head or whatever.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've seen other sky bison in the show, right? In flashbacks, or is it just the lemurs?
We've seen this. The flashback we saw like a field of bison and lemurs.
And I think the bison then had the arrow as well. So the sky bison have the arrow, and I guess the airbenders are given the arrow as like a rite of passage or something.
Is that a tattoo on a 12-year-old?
I believe it is. I could be wrong, but I think it is.
Oh my God. I just assumed it was body, like it was part of being a bender like this. It just so happens the airbender, like if you have this power, this magically kind of appears on your body. It is a little darker, the fact that they're tattooing children.
I mean, I think it's a cultural thing. I think if you look at like other cultures of today, that's probably not uncommon. We quote unquote, like injure our children with earrings and nose rings and stuff like that. And
I guess I just, having had both my ear pierced and had tattoos, I will take a piercing. I mean, I want tattoos. I want more tattoos, but like what hurts less is a piercing for sure. Because it's one
there's
needle.
Different methods of tattooing as well. So it could be that the method of tattooing that they're doing is different than ours. And
certainly, because it is a magical land of bending powers. So, but that just opened my mind to so many like questions about, because wait, so do any of the other, when we get the flashbacks of Aang in that one episode, do they all have arrows, or was it only him?
I think they all have arrows.
Okay.
I believe Monk Gyatso, right? He's got one. Let's do some reconnaissance and verify this real quick. Yeah, he's got it. He's got the arrow as well.
Okay. All right. I have feelings that I don't know what they are quite yet about Aang being tattooed because like again, he's 12, has had them for a while. Let's just say that like there's no way they're fresh. So
he got them when he was 12.
Did he get them? Does it say that?
Yeah. So I'm looking online, and he got them when he was 12. So relatively recent in the scheme of time where he wasn't frozen 100 years ago, considering the freezing.
I don't know where I feel. I don't. And again, I mean, it's their culture. It's your culture, whoever's culture. If you're tattooing children and it's accepted by your culture, I guess, wahoo. But as an American, I have thoughts, and I'm not sure exactly where they are yet. I gotta sit on that.
We try to be like so open to other people's cultures, but as far as the tattoos go, you're like, nope, no more tattoos for anybody in this world.
Listen, I know we're going on a tangent, and I know that and this is a good thing. I think no other podcast is giving you 8 minutes on tattooing children. but I'm very open to other cultures. It's just, it feels like does the child get a choice? Like did Aang say, hit me up with that big blue arrow, baby?
So according to what I'm reading it's not something that just a person from the air culture gets. It's, you have to be an airbending master to get those arrows.
Okay. Wow. So you know what?
Relatively young because of being an avatar, becoming a master.
Okay. So it's not all the children. It's just poor little Aang who gets potentially. I'm not saying that this is what it is, Mike, but potentially mutilated without wanting that tattoo at the age of 12 because he's the Avatar. That's the only reason it happens. They're not tattooing all 12-year-olds. Got it. Okay. Okay.
I do want to like now I'm interested in like other cultures and whether or not they do as well. And again, I would imagine that, you know, it's probably less painful than some of the other stuff that we see because like we're doing it with like, I don't know. You know what? Let's get off the tangent.
So this is where this had a lot of, now that I'm looking at my notes, had a lot of good lines or good moments. All kind of in the beginning. Sure. Like when Aang's like, all right, like I'll get on board with Sokka. Sokka deserves his time to shine. Walking might be fun. Slash cut to walking stinks.
Walking sticks? Stinks. Yes. Stinks. I was like, walking sticks. Did I miss something?
No.
Yeah, walking's no fun.
And
not when you can fly.
Right. Exactly. Like that is the. I again, maybe his instincts are right, maybe, but you can't convince me that after when we've seen our big boy Appa, when he needs to, he's fast. He can be a fast big boy. So
very true.
So I don't think you can convince me Sokka was right and his instincts were right in this moment. I understand him
because he walks them right into a fire army camp.
I love that the common thing in this episode is Sokka's instincts and whether they're right or wrong. How often that's brought up in this episode. I know that it's more than 3, which is like the comedy rule. I'm glad they broke that rule. I'm glad they brought it up so often. It was so good every time it came up.
I think like it might have happened more than 3 times, like when they were talking about it, but I think it really would have been just 3 sections. It was the beginning, it was the middle, and it was the end.
That's accurate. That's accurate. Now, my note. So the instincts are wrong because they walk into like a little Fire Nation camp, and you know now it's like all right, well you're right. And my note here is now I look at it and say, well, I hate this note. But at the time, Jet and the Freedom Fighters spinoff when. So I loved their introduction to this show.
Jet is another fan favorite of people, you know, who've watched the Avatar series.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he is, and I'm inclined to think that his freedom fighters, those other kids or whatever, I'm inclined to think that they actually like he's the quote unquote bad one. The other ones were just like fighting for a cause they believed in, but I think could have easily been swayed to like not be a dick.
And when you say a bad one, you're talking about later in the episode where Jet decides, hey, number one, we're gonna almost. I would assume before Sokka intervened, they were gonna kill that old man in the forest, and then later, and I forgive me if I'm wrong. I kept hearing them say it was an Earth Kingdom village.
Yes,
right.
It was
right.
Yeah.
So I mean, clearly there are Fire Nation people there, but they were willing to make a sacrifice of other nation citizens as well.
When I first heard, and this is jumping way ahead, folks, but when we first heard the plan that Jet gave to Sokka, like classic like villain move. Let me just give you my plan. I thought I heard it was Fire Nation. Like I thought it was just like all Fire Nation people, and I was like, all right, well, like I get it, but I also agree with Sokka. Like there's innocent people there. Like just because there's a nation that is fighting the entire world doesn't mean everyone in that nation is a bad person. Like there are good people that are stuck in miserable situations because of where they live.
Right. It's we were talking last episode about how this show has carried over throughout the years. I mean, and it's very much in line with what's happening in the world right now. Like there are some people embroiled in conflicts who, they're part of a nation that either started or is making things ongoing, but they want nothing to do with it. You know, like
Right.
there are good people, no matter how, quote unquote rotten
Mhm.
a nation or a force might be.
Yep. And even like you could convince me that even a soldier they're literally just making sure that them and their family survive sometimes. Like it's even if you're fighting on the front lines for the wrong side, listen, history might not look favorably on you, but like you can convince me that like, okay, there was a reason. You could and like same like that old man that was a Fire Nation man, supposedly, um, based off everything we know and seen, which all came from Jet. So I guess take it with a grain of salt. But
Well, and we also saw him wearing the red attire and everything.
that's true. That's true. So we'll assume that's the truth. He's an old man, so I'm not saying he's innocent. He maybe did a lot of bad things 20 years ago when he was not so old. But to just murder him in like just cold blood when he's like defenseless, is a bully tactic.
Right. And I mean the assumption now, having known what we learned at the end of the episode, that what Jet said was a lie. My assumption is the sword that they acquired, they didn't acquire. Sokka mentions like, I never saw a sword, but like there's some poison in Jet's sword. Why?
Right. The Sokka, his instincts may be wrong about things relating to like life, right? But I feel like, and this might be the second time, definitely the first, but it might be the second time we've seen his instincts about people be accurate. I guess his instincts about Aang were wrong at first, but I could, all right, I get it. Like you're just on high alert because you don't. Who is this strange kid boy that was frozen in ice, right? Like that's saying he's the Avatar. It's I could buy why you're like your mind's going a mile a minute, but his instincts about Jet are spot on almost from the get go.
Right? Yeah, he definitely has him pegged.
And this is an episode. We talked about in the previous episode how like a lot of times we see Katara be like the calm, cool one. And in that episode, she kind of flips the script and she's the hot-headed one who we kind of usually see that. Not that Sokka's like hot-headed, but he's the one that like gets very flamboyant and emotional and loud.
Yeah, he's egotistical and arrogant.
Yes. Well, this is her episode where she falls in love. Where
completely smitten.
Yes. It's the same thing. And we saw this happen a few episodes ago with Sokka in that it was an Earth Village, right? Yeah. Or in Katoshu? Kyoshi. We saw it happen with him. And again, this episode parallels that one, a few times in the sense that like, here's another set of people who are not bending people, but they are really good at fighting. So we've seen it a few times. It just so happens we've also seen it back to back weeks now, because the freedom fighters they don't have any magic powers or any bending powers, but they are incredibly talented.
Yeah, there's a lot of proficiency there. Certainly Jet has some acrobatic skills and combat skills to keep up with the Avatar. There was a part of me, even watching it back, knowing, what I knew about the episode, where like I half expected him to beat Aang and Katara and Sokka to be the one that needs to save the day.
Which, I mean, really is kind of how it plays out. Not necessarily in like those terms you put down, but, and we'll get to that. I do want to save that part for the end. But yeah, I mean, it is fascinating to see how, and I think Aang, I don't know that he's like blind because of any kind of devotion to anybody. I think he's blind to it because he's a 12-year-old kid and Katara seems to trust him. So why, and I trust Katara.
I think a big part of it was dude just found the biggest like tree fort ever, and was just back to being a kid. Like, hey, everything's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah,
like zip line. I mean, again, some of my favorite parts of this episode is there's one where it's very obvious that he's having fun, right? The first time you see him ziplining and him shouting something. But then again, like a few moments later when Jet is talking to Katara, just in the background, I don't even think you hear, maybe very, very quietly you hear Aang like screaming with joy, but you just see him ziplining with Momo straight down that absolutely. Line.
You know what? It's subtle too, but when he meets some of the other people in Jet's crew, he makes fun of, not necessarily makes fun of Pipsqueak's name, but mentions it, and Pipsqueak like gives him like a knock on the back, and he like ends up on the ground, and he's like having a good time even then.
Very fun scene. I mean, everything in this episode points me to believe, when you look at the episode as a whole, knowing that Jet is not necessarily a good guy and that the freedom fighters maybe have crossed some lines, I really do think that is just like kind of similar to what we just said about, and I already forget if it was this episode or the previous episode, but it was this episode. Jet's the bad guy. The freedom fighters, I feel like my perception of it is that this is the best option we have for us to survive.
Right.
And
but no one's keeping them there. Like it's not like they're employed in an army that they can't walk away from.
True.
So in some ways, like it's difficult not to hold them responsible. I would say some of them seem younger and more impressionable than Jet, and that might have a piece to play. But you've got I would imagine Pipsqueak is of Jet's age or older, and what was the other guy's name? Longshot.
I think so.
The bowman with the impeccable aim is another one who seems old enough to know better, because you would imagine that to get that level of skill, like you need to be old enough to know better.
Right.
And he's the one who ultimately lays down the shot that's going to blow up the dam.
True.
So
true. I guess my reason, like we just saw how easily Jet was able to like smooth talk his way. How like he does, he's charismatic. Like he can smooth talk his way into having Katara and Aang help with part of his plan. Now he hid a lot of that. He hid a lot of that plan from them, or straight up lied about the plan. So I don't know. I think that, and maybe not all the freedom fighters, but I think some of those freedom fighters, specifically Pipsqueak and the little guy that we thought was Pipsqueak, I think you could probably convince those two to abandon that cause if the circumstances were different. If there were other people around to save them from Jet, I think they would have easily left Jet.
It could be,
but we also see Sokka shine when he's helping with this. Like the way he's convinced to stay another night is that Jet says something about an important mission, and it cuts to the next day, and he like bangs his sword into the tree and uses the hilt of it to like listen for footsteps and stuff. And I thought that was really, really cool, because Sokka almost never gets his time to shine. And he starts the episode off not really getting his time to shine, and in a humorous way, in a non-serious way, ends the episode not getting his time to shine. But realistically, that's, the rest of the other 18 minutes of this episode, he is spot on about everything, and his time has shown.
Right. It was a Sokka-centric episode that really did get to make him feel like an integral part of the gang, and not just a freeloader who's along for comedic, timing and, breaking up the monotony of whatever seriousness is going on.
Exactly. Yeah. I thought it was another fun moment was when Aang was playing with those little like poppers or whatever, and threw one at
Momo was like, "Screw you, buddy."
And then he just starts like, he jumps on Aang's shoulders and just throwing a bunch at Aang's feet. That made me laugh a lot, like out loud.
That was very funny.
I mean, we've kind of hit on the rest of the episode where the Jet and the Freedom Fighters have this massive plan to stop the Fire Nation in the area. Unfortunately, that plan involves hurting a lot of innocent people who, if you were like me, at first you're like, Fire Nation, I get it. But when you listen clearly and listen to the at least two other times that they mention the villagers who are innocent there, they're Earth Nation, Earth Kingdom villagers. So like it's a whole other level. Like you're no better than the Fire Nation at that point.
Right. Yeah. It very much is it's not always a situation where it's the enemy of my enemy.
Yes, exactly. And in this case, like it really like, and Katara is heartbroken at this because, she's obviously smitten. I want to say early on in this podcast and this show, when we were talking about it, I mentioned something about like, oh, I could definitely see, like, I feel like she's a little smitten with Aang. It goes like, I felt like in the very early stages, or it felt, well, Aang was definitely smitten with Katara. It felt like Katara could be, except of the age, not that it's a big age gap, but the age gap. Right. And she like kind of has always felt like maybe, but definitely she's like the mother figure here. This is the first time that proves me wrong. Like, she was never smitten with Aang, because you see when, like, this is her smitten, and she's like legit heartbroken, because unlike Sokka, who with his episode of being smitten, like, it ended good for him, maybe even with a kiss, I forget, but his
Suki didn't end up betraying,
yes,
the sensibilities of the gang and doing something that they would consider very evil.
Right, exactly. And Jet did. And I still think it would be fun to have like a limited series with those characters, like leading, like what got them to that point? Like, how did the Freedom Fighters begin? And there's nothing wrong with like a series about bad people. I think that kind of stuff plays out really well, because a lot of times bad people, there's a reason they get that way, and honestly, from their perspective, they aren't bad. So there's an interesting story with Jet and the Freedom Fighters that I would love to see play out somewhere.
Right.
But you see Katara just use her that. Well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Obviously she's heartbroken, and when she discovers the truth, and then you get Jet versus Katara, Jet versus Aang. He's holding his own against both of them. One of them, the Avatar, who can really use his airbending abilities and is a pretty damn good waterbender, and Katara, who is definitely a better airbender or waterbender now than she was just an episode ago.
Right. Yeah. And not only that, but she's cleverly used a device that lets her always have water on hand as well.
Yeah, you know what? I noticed that in this episode, and I didn't think anything of it at first until you just mentioned it. I was like, oh, that's just because they were walking, because her idiot brother wanted to walk, so she had water on hand. But 100%, you're right. Like, I hope I see that on her shoulder going forward, because that is such a neat little, again, a neat detail that this show has added.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we know that there's like water in the atmosphere. So like, I don't know ever that we see a waterbender do quite that. Like Aang can do airbending whenever, firebenders can do firebending wherever, earthbenders ostensibly can do it anywhere except for out to sea. But it is kind of weird that waterbenders can't just kind of manipulate enough water from the atmosphere. I could be wrong. I could be spoiling something from the future, but I don't recall seeing it. Maybe it happened in Korra. I don't recall.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that it would make sense if you could. Like, why there is water in the air, and they don't do it when they're making the water rise from the geysers, right? Like, there's water, it's just far down. The steam is just saying there's water down there. But and this is like, so this is the episode where we get like a little bit of sadness, right? When because they fail. Sokka's nowhere to be found, because he, as far as anyone knows, he got taken away, or worse.
Right, presumably killed. Like, she's crying almost as if she thinks he's dead.
Right. and there's just too late to stop Longshot from firing that arrow and blowing up the dam. And now we have our benders who feel responsible for what's about to happen. And in that chaos of the water, like going through the village, it's very sad. You see like the doll floating on by. But just before that, you see a cabbage stall.
The lone cabbage. So,
and I was like, the cabbages. That's what I'm thinking about right now. I also think that this episode, what it did wrong in this moment of sadness is that it didn't linger on it long enough, and potentially gave away the fact that Sokka was going to save the day, because he did get out of his issues by tricking Pipsqueak and little guy.
Because we had already known at that point that he was free. So like the assumption was, if he didn't show up, how would he have failed? I think like certainly the idea was, and maybe it's more to children who are watching the show. Hey, my expectation is that he's going to go and try and move those barrels, or try and get to Longshot and stop him from taking that shot at the barrels. And maybe like they're Dave Filoni, who directed this episode, maybe his suspicion was, no one will think that he'll go to the village and try and get them to turn away.
Right. And again, I don't know if it's because I'm an adult or whatever, but as soon as we see the cabbages, if I'm being honest, is when I knew everything was okay. Right. Like I knew for a fact that Sokka saved the day.
Is cabbage our safe word?
Maybe. So I think that's the only mistake this episode had, was that it in a show that is not afraid to get a little dark and get a little sad and get emotional. It had an opportunity to do it again, and it didn't allow it to flourish. Like it planted the seed, but they didn't water it, which is ironic. But that's the only thing I think this episode did wrong. Otherwise, that scene, I mean, does play out like it plays out well, because your characters are sad. The bad guy thinks they succeed, and then the big reveal is Sokka saves the day. And we kind of ends with Katara leaving Jet on ice, which I think is, again, I think I mentioned this in the last episode, I really love that that's part of water bending ability, is that you're able to, I don't know that we've seen the reverse, right, where we've seen ice go to water, but we've seen her freeze water into ice.
Right. I don't know that we would see many opportunities after they left the Southern Water Tribe.
Right. So, but she can't be convinced that what Jet's doing is right, despite having like a similar origin story. And she walks away, and she goes back with her her family and her fan family and in the gang. And it ends with that little humorous note about, Sokka's instincts. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. Right. And again, I would say, overall, this episode was great. I think I liked it just as much as the previous episode. And
no Zuko though. No
yeah. And again, that's telling how strong this episode is, because
you don't even notice it until you think about it later.
Yes, exactly. I guess technically this is a bit of a filler episode, because I'm not sure how the story really pushed forward, other than that we've just like learned that there's more to this world than meets the eye.
I think that's a pressing point, because you learn that just because the Fire Nation are the bad guys doesn't mean that they're always the bad guys, and it doesn't mean that the people who are facing against them are always the good guys.
You're right, and that is not needed, right? You don't need to do that in the show or any show that's about this kind of war or anything. But they took the time to do it. It may have been a filler episode, but I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I probably liked it just as much as the other ones, because I think the who ended up being the antagonists of this episode, Jet and the Freedom Fighters, I thought they were very fascinating characters. Like I said, the only misstep, and this is maybe just me expecting a little bit more from a kid's cartoon, is I would have loved to see that sadness of what happens at the end. Like, let's like live in that for just maybe another minute. Make me believe that, oh shit, Jet won.
Yeah, and at what cost?
Right. But yeah, great episode. I loved it. Do you have any trivia for this one?
Nah, I mean, we kind of like integrated it into the episode. Like, there's some stuff about like the hook swords being what they were and things like that, but nothing of real substance.
Which is something, we didn't really mention that, but like they were fantastic weapons. That was that made his fight scene against Katara and Aang so great. So great.
Right. He's clearly an expert at what he does.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And again, I'm gonna wrap up saying for the third time that I think that there's an interesting story of how Jet and the Freedom Fighters came to be, and that this
now, we've
to
seen
me
the Cabbage
should.
Merchant before. Do you think that we see Jet again, or is this a one-off?
It's funny that I don't think we're going to see Jet again, because he is a named character that is so much better than the Cabbage Salesman. But I think the Cabbage Salesman we're going to see over and over again. And I don't think we see Jet in season one. I don't think we see him again in season one. I think it's very possible we see him in like season 2 or 3. Or maybe in future installments of this series, because he is young enough to probably live on beyond this series. But honestly, like I don't know how interested I don't know how interested I am in seeing him after this point. I think what's a more satisfying story is seeing how Jet and the Freedom Fighters come to be, and that this is how their story ends.
Right, you want to lead up to this moment, not seeing how he frees himself and goes after Katara and the gang and stuff like that.
And honestly, if there's an interesting story that we get from Jet and the Freedom Fighters after this, I think it has to be in a future season, if not a future series. And B, it's them obviously realizing the error in their ways and them actually being freedom fighters at this point and fighting for good. I mean, I guess there's an interesting story if they come back as like the big villains of something, but I don't know that I'm interested in that. And again, I think I'm interested in seeing them in the future. Like I just kind of want to see their past and how they got to be who they are. And then, just knowing that the episode 10 of book 1 is their final chapter.
Right.
So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we did it. We nailed this episode. We made sure that what this episode was about. And I think we can safely say that there's no turning back. Like, after officially being halfway through book 1 here, this podcast is here to stay. So
unless you don't like the next episode so much.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always a possibility, right? All right, Mike, where can they find you?
You can find me at tellus.com, and you can find me on patreon.com/tellus. You can find me on tellus.etsy.com, and you can follow me on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on twitch.tv/thattellusguy.
And it sounded like you were about to say it's not the lowest rated one is the next episode.
It's not the lowest rated amongst both series. There's a Korra one that's rated lower.
Oh, so the next one is the one. Episode 11 is the one that could lose me, huh? Interesting. Right. There's your spoilers, not spoilers. There's your cliffhanger for the next episode. Will I no longer be the last podbender? Will I give my podbending abilities up because of episode 11? Who knows? I don't even know yet. Find out next time. I'm not going to even plug myself right here on Avatar State Radio on avatarstateradio.com.